LBR LBO Brand Summit 2017.
Before I open the panel discussion and ask a question, I think we see that there are like 2 or 3 different types of arrangements we see in the market. We see digital as a silo, digital on the side, and then there are organizations where you have digital in the core. Now, FMCG is obviously a category that has extremely challenging in the ROI segment and calculations and all that. And I think the thinking is almost very different from FMCG and considered to a more of the hospitality or e-commerce section. What I would like to find out is that the 2 speakers before us spoke quite well about the insights and the brand, etc. Can you give us a bit of your thought process about the organization and the thinking that is required to really going on a journey of adopting digital to the core?
Yeah, absolutely. First thought for me is we as marketeers need to think ourselves as value creators. Amal spoke about this in the panel discussion before. At every part of the value chain, how do we create value? Now, when we start thinking about that, we stop thinking about digital as a channel, which is a completely wrong way of thinking. Think about it. We live in a world where when we used to sit at focus group discussion, we now do social listening. We used to do push content, now we co-create, we crowdsource content. We used to have brick and mortar stores, and now we have virtual stores. We used to have physical distribution, we still do have that, but we also have drone delivery. So in this world, we cannot think of digital as a channel. So as marketeers, most of us are in this room, think of value creation at every aspect of the value chain, creating value to the consumer, to the customer. Think of digital being everywhere, but a way of working, not as a channel, it's the way of working. When we think of digital as way of working, then it is about which tool that we use to maximize the value to the consumer or the customer. So to your question also on return on investment and how is it justified, and I saw that many of those questions came on the screen as well, it completely goes away because your business results is your return on investment because it is the way we work. It is the choice of the tool that we do to maximize value to our consumers and to the business.
Fantastic, Vidya. That's a great insight. Coming to Rasika, I think there was a conversation I think we had about constantly developing content and using that as a mechanism of brand participation. Would you like to elaborate that thought process? Oh, is it working? Yes. And how you can kind of start engaging at a much deeper level. I think most of the brands and organizations do tremendous amount of content because people say it's content development is what is needed right now for engagements, etc. Would you like to give your thought process, because I know that you are basically have a very different point of view on that.
So as digital is a space of constant conversation, I think your question is how can the brand participate in the conversation beyond just throwing out content. So you should start by creating entertaining content and always remember people come to be entertained. Ideally, these should be very short, entertaining stories because people's attention spans, particularly on social media, is small these days, and your brand needs to be well embedded in that story. Remember, yet again, the digital space is a space of constant conversation. The communication needs to be two-way communication, and your brand needs to actively participate in this conversation. Build trust, loyalty, and Charu mentioned this, it's very important to be authentic as well. Your brand needs to showcase a set of beliefs, values. You need to exemplify what you stand for. And you need to also connect on a personal level with people. It's difficult to sell products or services unless you have first developed a relationship with the people. So I'd like to illustrate with an example, if I can. Red Bull. Everyone knows Red Bull. It's a brand that's built entirely on digital. They focus on images and videos of extreme sports. They sponsor a lot of athletes. And what they sell is an energetic way of life, a way of life that people want to follow and be involved in. And they really make people feel that they're a part of the experience. So you know their tagline, Red Bull gives you wings. So they really illustrate that concept. Sport is mixed with innovation. And very importantly, there is no direct marketing or advertising. You'd be hard pressed to see a Red Bull can in any of their imagery. So if you can just take a look at their success levels on a few social media platforms. On Facebook, they have a massive 43 million likes. So as we all know, likes alone is not a measure of absolute success. They only post 1 or 2 posts a day. However, they are one of the most active Facebook pages in the market today. They respond very actively to comments. They engage with the audience. They have a lot of videos, very high quality videos, which are very informative, entertaining, very vibrant. They also use a lot of interactive contests, which we've seen some of the Sri Lankan brands also using in the recent past. And the PR teams regularly hand out attractive gifts to the winners. On Twitter, 2 million followers, again, a high number. The playful side of the brand is highlighted. The content is, again, image-based. It has a wow factor. Make it image-based, makes it more shareable as well. They use amusing captions. They make use of words. They play on words. They try to show the human side of the brand. And the chief aim on Twitter is to motivate their followers into a very active way of life.
Rasika, just to make sure that I stay in focus here, like I think Red Bull is a great example. I think even GoPro has done tremendous amount of work in it. But as a organization, like that is from the customer side of it, I mean, in order for you to create that amount of content and all that, what kind of challenges do you think that the organizations need to make sure that they handle at first?
Well, so you need to have a great team, obviously.
Understood.
You need to have a great budget as well.
Is it really? Do you really need budget for it?
Well, to create the sort of imagery and the visual effects that Red Bull have created,
okay,
you need a big budget. Now, take an example of one of the recent videos they created. That was the Red Bull Stratos video.
Sure. But don't you think empowerment and things like that are also important for the organization to do that? Because oftentimes our problem with most of these brand and organizations is the fact that the people who want to do these engagements on digital, they just don't have the empowerment anymore.
Exactly. You need empowerment. We spoke about this in the previous session. We need top management buy-in and direction. So all that is very important, but it's also equally important to realize that this is the new direction. And I believe that's the purpose of this session.
Sure, got it, Rasika. So let me just come back to Sunil for you. There was an interesting, I think, if you look at from the corner to here, we spoke about the customer, some interesting case studies about the brand, and then we spoke about how do we need to handle that and what need to be done, and then we spoke about content. Obviously, in the digital age, authenticity. And I think that part of it has a very interesting takeoff in. And I think the question I wanted to ask you is that why should brands think about this and what has changed?
Actually, I want to bring a fresh perspective. See, the way we know history is what we have been told by the people, those who ruled that time. But it's no longer the same now. Any act, any event, any wrongdoing by a corporate house cannot be forgotten. Digital age, everything gets stored. No matter how much you want to delete, even one source to another source to another, there are still going to be some backups where things can be pulled out anytime you want. I mean, we all know the recent ad of Pepsi. It has so much of bounce back. So why it is important as a marketers for us, because we are the face of the company, we take our message to the world. And every messaging we do has to be really thought after. We spoke about a lot of budget required, a lot of empowerment required, a lot of speed required, but it's also very important that we do enough research, we do not offend, and we make sure that whatever proposition we put in front of the world is our image, which is going to stay for a very, very long time. The recent act of United Airlines, we all know, if that was an incident happening a long back time where nobody took that video and posted, I think the company would have gotten away with that. But look what exactly happened. They had to agree on an undisclosed amount, and then that's how the the case was settled. So, long story short, the times have changed. In this digital world, the organization has to be more responsible to make sure that whatever we put forward has to be absolutely thought after so that there are no side effects or ill effects of our proposition.
Thanks, Sunil. So, Charu, I'll just come to you because there are a couple of questions that I've mentioned. So, I want to load the question up a little bit. You spoke a lot about some of the case studies about customer behavior and what the shift is taking place. Could you give us a summary of the shift in your perspective? I think we heard different points of view here. The organizations need to take, number one. The second one is, I think we discussed this. We'd love to get into a conversation about a little bit of BFSI sector and some of the challenges around that sector and digital, really bringing digital to its core. So if you'd like to take those questions.
Yeah, thanks. I'll take the first one first. So shifts, I did talk about some consumer shifts which are happening, largely globally as well in most of the countries that I'm visiting. But I think organizationally, I think the big shift that needs to be done is firstly break down silos. Of course, we talked about it. But also in the way we're looking at our customers. The identification of who your consumers really are. Now, you know, there was a time when you had one definition and that made life very easy, that it was you psychographically and demographically kind of put it all together. But now by behavior is where you have to start segmenting your consumer. So at any point in time, you could actually have for your business I'll give you an example of one of the electronic retail chains we're working with to completely reimagine their customer experience. We came up with something like 18 customer segments. Okay, and all of them visit these stores. So how do you deal with 18 customer segments and provide a customer experience which is seamless for all of them, right? So then we break it down into clusters and say, okay, 18 can come to 6. Then 6 comes to about 4, which is the lowest common denominator. Now that is a good place to start. Rather than imagining all 18 at the outset, you start with your lowest common denominator of customer experience transformation with about 3 or 4 of them. See what layers you need to transform that. And then keep adding the other layers on top of it as you move along, right? And there was a question here on hospitality. I could just see 2 lines. I couldn't see all the lines in terms of how do you really reimagine the business on hospitality. Exactly the same way. You will have so many different customer segments coming and staying in your hotel and in your hospitality service. Now, where do you start changing the customer experience? Do you dream of the ultimate which you want in the next 2 years? Do that, but you need to take it 3 months at a time. So the brand planning that we do, the market planning that we do has also crunched the timing a lot more. In the past, we would draw up these 3-year, 5-year journeys and stick to it like cast in stone. Now what we do is we take the vision at 1 year at a time, break it down to about 3 months and keep revisiting what changes have happened every 3 months to course correct, right? So quickly to just wrap that part up, I think we need to look at the customer experience from a customer journey point of view. But this customer journey could have several journeys, right? And we have to address all of them. And I think importantly here is not about describing the journey and going through the journey path with interactions. It's important to look at how in those points of interaction can you change behavior of the consumer, right? So today, if a consumer is using hair oil, right? It's a category which is going to disappear very soon because of time issues, because of lifestyle issues, and because of integration of oil into other product issues. It could be a category that's going to disappear. So what should the change in behavior be affected in each of those customer journey points is important.
So I think there was an important thing you said about wanting to be able to look at things in like a quarterly windows type of thing. I mean, our organization's really ready to that kind of a pace of looking at things. Is probably one of the biggest challenges, isn't it?
Which one was that?
No, so most of the organization, we have this financial year type of work we do. We look at 6 to months or even beyond that. Yeah. Now, you just mentioned that most of this stuff may need to revisit and relooked at every quarterly, every 3 months. Yeah. That's why I think probably from the previous session, the CEO's contribution is really critical for the execution of that. Yes. Would you like to elaborate anything in that for the running something in such a short time span?
So we're doing it constantly with so here it's not just the CEO, okay, the CFO plays a big role as well. And that big mindset shift comes also from the CFO because CFOs are always a little worried about I've given you this budget, now stick to it and do what you want. I don't think that budgeting planning can happen like that anymore. And all the clients we work with now, we look at every 3-year evaluation and then moving forward and course correction. So that's become a norm now for us, right? Especially BFSI. Look at the BFSI sector since you brought it up. It's the one sector that globally is getting disrupted like every morning. You have no idea what is going to hit you tomorrow. How do you make a plan for your bank, and how do you say that my retail banking, I will create 10 more retail banks by in these markets? The physical banking is going away, right? Yeah. How do you plan for it 3 years in advance? Now, the important thing is we work with a lot of BFSI brands, and at the high end for the HNIs, we are looking more at how do you make those relationships through expertise and content, right? Whereas at the inclusion level into the inner cities and markets of India, we are looking at how do you get them into the fold? How do you make transactions, or how do you make banking more convenient for them? Because they can't go to banks, because they don't have access to information. How do we make it more convenient for them is the objective there.
We'll come back to that because that's interesting. Yesterday I just told the panel also, I think I completed about 7 different pages of documentation and signatures just to get a account opening in Sri Lanka. Jonathan, very interesting stuff. But in your path that you mentioned about the journey, one of the first steps was insights. And I think one of the things that we all know about is that we all know insights are needed to derive the objectives and how we want to build it forward to manage in the digital world. But I don't think most of us really understand how to go about doing that. Is there a way that in a very concise way you can give us like what are the things that you all advise an organization to start doing to really elaborate on the insights part of it as the first step of building this?
Yeah, I mean, I think insight is what comes when you process and explore, dig into, unravel the answers to the questions you ask of people. So simply asking to people, so well, you know, how often do you go to the bank, or how often do you like to do X, Y, Z? It doesn't tell you very much, but you need to dig underneath it and extract the I don't know, is it the psychographic or even the ethnographic activities that a customer or a user will go through in the experience in the brand. And from that you get, ideally, doesn't happen all the time, some sort of an aha insight that goes, oh, wow, okay, so they do that. Well, I had really no idea. That's interesting, because that then has implications on the product formulation or the closure to a particular bottle. And it's very often the kind of the hidden insights, for indeed, inherent in the word insight, or built into it, or implicit in the word insight, is in some way it's hidden. And it's only when you kind of look under the rock and poke at it and then draw conclusions from that it actually becomes an insight. Otherwise, it's just streams of anecdotal data or whatever it might be that you get from a research organization. So looking for those insights, the points that, and I've referred to them as pain points, which is, I think, relevant to this. The point that makes things, makes a difference to how you then address the opportunity and the business challenge you face. And how do you use that insight that is to do with user behavior and to make that easier for them, or make that more convenient or more rewarding or more enlightening or more satisfying, provides you with a platform upon which to build better brand communications and ultimately a better and more valuable brand. So I think the kind of how do you get those insights? The tools are all there. But the trick is to interpret the information to allow you to see and uncover.
Yeah, Jonathan, but does that need a special type of skill set that we as a normal organization do not exist right now? Or is that a different talent that we need to get in?
I don't think so. I think it's just natural intelligence, really. But the start point, the mental start point, has to be about looking, or the desire to look into the activities of the consumers, the users, and to dig into that to really understand what that process is for them, rather than superficially look at it as just, well, we get, 8 out of 10 cat owners prefer X, Y, Z.
Sure.
It's the why.
Got it.
You know, so
Understood.
it's good research, was distinct from blur research.
Yeah. I think Charu was waiting, raising her hand, and wanted to say something about that. Yeah.
There was a question here which I completely enjoyed reading, so I wanted to bring it out. And that has relevance to what you were saying in terms of, do we need a different kind of organization? Someone actually wrote here saying, is anyone appearing on this panel today under 30? Great question. Firstly, don't we look under 30? I mean, that's a wrong question. We are all under 30 here on the panel. The second thing is, I think that is an important question in terms of diversity, right? I don't think we can have an organization all under 30s or an organization all over 30s. I think that diversity is extremely important and far more important in today's times, because you need to bring that understanding of the consumer behavior and the relativity as well as the creativity to it. Whereas we also need to bring in the strategic understanding and the expertise of and experience across categories. So it's a great combination of age, profile and gender diversity, which is important in today's times because it's going digital.
And I think some of the topics that we are discussing here are very needs a level of maturity interpretation, and I think age is not a reflection of that at any cost. I want to come back to you, and I think we spoke about a little bit about digital being in the core, and then obviously the term that Lakshman banned us to talk about digital marketing. So essentially, there is a better, like if you have digital in your core, which is basically looking at the entire organization philosophy, there are things I believe you can avoid, and the pitfalls that you can actually avoid. Would you like to care a little bit about the difference between thinking digital as a whole versus digital as a one-sided engagement?
Yeah, that's a very, very important question. What are the pitfalls that we can avoid? For me, the first one is, let's not wait for a digital strategy. I hear this terminology a lot. Everyone's waiting for a full integrated digital strategy that covers all touch points. It's not the digital strategy that we need, it is the business strategy that we need. It is then how we use the tools that we have to leverage that business strategy to maximize the value. The second pitfall that commonly happens amongst most marketeers is something that we've touched upon already, is grouping consumers, demographic, psychographic, interest. Let's not do that anymore. Consumers are not thinking that way. Let's look at the why, and Jonathan just spoke about it. Let's look at the whys. Let's avoid the pitfall of traditional grouping of consumers, but let's group them by their, whether they're immigrants, they're natives, whether they, why is the reason that they went onto an e-commerce platform and bought the product at 4 o'clock and not at 2 o'clock. So these are the whys that we need to understand when we try to target. The third pitfall to avoid is this talk on touch points. Touch points, often people believe touch points are fixed to a physical location. Not anymore. It's actually moving along with the consumer, the customer, the people. When people move along, touch points move along. In fact, let's not talk about touch points. It's not touch points, it's moments of truth. At each moment of truth, how do you then effectively engage with the consumer and create value? So that's the third pitfall. Let's not talk about touch point. The fourth pitfall that we all need to avoid is, don't think of digital of being off a screen. It's not just a laptop, a tablet or a mobile. Integrate digital and external world to give the richer experience. Many companies have, many apps have done that. In fact, in China, many learning apps are integrating external world to the internal. Pokemon, Wii, educational apps, these are all integrating. So let's not just think of digital being off a screen, but integrate it to the external world. So if we avoid these 4 pitfalls and think on delivering on our brand and business strategies, we would definitely get the success that we are looking for.
Thanks, Charu. So, Rasika, coming back to you, I think previously with Sunil, we spoke a little bit about the authenticity of the brands, etc. And I think there was an interesting word that we picked up, or actually you mentioned to me, called the brand activism. And I think, would it be good if you could just explain a little bit about what you mean by the brand activism and why is it more relevant than before? I know it has something to do with the authenticity part that Sunil spoke about. Would you care to elaborate a little bit and tell about the brand activism being relevant, more relevant today?
So they say sex doesn't sell anymore, and activism does. So with activism, brands need to show that they stand for values and ethical beliefs. This is quite different to positioning. So what you need to do is connect your product somehow to some pressing issue. So there are companies that have done that very cleverly. They pick up some wildly unrelated social or political issue that fuels people's conscience, and they exploit the situation much to their advantage. Now, a recent example is the fiasco that Uber found themselves in. The New York Taxi Workers Alliance was protesting against Trump's recent ban on Muslim majority countries, and they organized a token strike on JFK. Uber undermined this strike, and they in fact lifted surge pricing during that period. This didn't go well at all. People reacted immediately. There was a call to delete Uber. Hashtag delete Uber started trending, and Uber's popularity started dwindling. There was a company called Lyft that very cleverly exploited this situation because people were deleting Uber and installing Lyft. So Lyft's CEO actually donated $1 million to the American Civil Liberties Union in a clever strategic move. Uber tried to play catch up by stating that the ban was wrong and unjust, and they donated $3 million to the Taxi Workers Union, but that didn't go too well. The fact that Uber CEO Travis Kalanick is also a member of Trump's Strategic and Economic Policy Forum also wasn't seen in very positive light. So companies are constantly trying to exploit situations like this. There's a company called Kenko Coffee, which sells coffee in the UK. They train young men in Honduras to be coffee farmers. Now in Honduras, you get a lot of gangs, and you find a lot of young people getting involved with these gangs. So in a bid to prevent that, they're training these gang members to be coffee planters. There's a company called Patagonia, a clothing company. It closed all its stores on the day of the US election. This is so that nobody had an excuse not to vote. Starbucks supports refugees, Body Shop cares for animal rights. So there are lots of examples. Sunil mentioned the recent Pepsi ad, where Pepsi found themselves in hot water. The ad backfired. It was heavily criticized, and that was one of the few times that people were unanimous on the internet, and they agreed that Pepsi unjustly used protest imagery, trivializing protests such as the women's marches and Black Lives Matter, and tried to artificially spread a message of peace and goodwill. So people felt that Pepsi was not being authentic when they did that. So, so just to summarize, brands allow people to pat themselves on the back. People don't necessarily sacrifice anything. Yeah. What does it cost you? Delete Uber and you download Lyft. Sure. So the target groups are primarily millennials. Now millennials have high expectations from brands. Yeah. Now there's a belief these days that democracy and indeed the whole of humanity is under attack for some reason. And there's a new type of brand activism in the light of Brexit as well as Trump.
Yes, some international call coming to Rasika. But I'll come to Charu. There's an interesting question asked. Rasika said, you need big budgets.
No, I need to clarify.
You never said that.
Red Bull needs budgets.
Red Bull needs a big budget.
Not everyone does.
Right.
So the reason Red Bull needed that budget was to create very high quality imagery. But social media is cheap. Social media is available to anyone, as somebody also mentioned.
Got it.
So at any level, with any type of spend, you can create a successful campaign.
So I'll ask this question in another way, Charu. Like one of the things we notice with most of these digital core businesses is that their orientation toward profit is very different from traditional businesses. Okay. So everything, nothing broken, I hope. Right. So one of the things is that, like, if you take even organizations like Amazon, one of the things you see is that, you know, while they have grown significantly over the revenues over the last X number of years, their profitability have remained somewhat stagnant throughout the X number of years. This orientation is a very different challenge for traditional businesses who doesn't have digital in the core. Would you care to elaborate that and also talk a little bit about the budget part of it?
So, each organization is on a different level on the digital ladder. And I think that recognition first needs to be drawn out. Where are you? I mean, there are, let's say, assume there are 7 steps. Some may say 5, 6, whatever. So there are 7 laddering steps to it. If your ambition is to get to the highest step, don't start there. That's something I had said even earlier. You need to recognize where is your organization today and what is your appetite and how much can you invest. Sure, if you have deep pockets and there are investors, then you get to that 7th stage on the ladder much faster. But if you don't have deep pockets and you don't have too many investors backing you, get the basics right. Frankly, really get the basics right. I mean, again, let me just take hospitality, right? If I walk into a Cinnamon Grand, if I do not have a great experience with the staff, I'm not going to come back no matter how many messages you push on digital to me and whatever offers you make online to me and how you search find me when I'm looking for a holiday and all that. I have a bad experience, I'll take it back with me. So I think just getting first the basics right is very, very important. And without getting that right, don't start messaging is an again important thing. So I think the budgets can be carved around your ambition really. It doesn't need, and again, when we look at budgets on digital, there are 2 kinds of budgets. There's a marketing budget, which is more communication and interaction with the consumers. Then there's a capital investment on the technology that you'll have to set up. So when you have to go online into an e-commerce business, you do need the capital expenditure. How can you set up an e-commerce business without setting up your e-commerce website, without having an OMS, which is order management system in place? I mean, those are heavy investments that you have to make. So if you have to embark on that kind of a business, you have to have larger investments.
Right. Thank you, Jonathan. Jonathan, I saw you nodding as well. Would you like to add something to that? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was just a recognition of the fact that the brand experience is ultimately a physical one. And the way that we get to it might be, and increasingly is, hence this conference, through digital channels. But your dissatisfaction with, or a member of staff will carry with you despite the messages you get sent afterwards. In fact, those become more irritating. You actually, switch them off mentally and are annoyed by what seemingly sort of thoughtless, continued sort of blitzkrieging of messaging, when actually your recent physical experience was not up to standard. Those messages become poisonous in a sense and totally counterproductive. So that was really why I was nodding.
Thanks, Jonathan. Appreciate it. I'm coming back to you, Sunil. I think we spoke a little bit about a number of things. There's a very important thing about traditional communications, talking about frequency and reach. And then in digital, talking about this touch point positivity versus touch point frequency. So would you like to elaborate on that? And how does that need to be improved in an organization, and how that need to be thought through in an organization in the current context of digital?
Okay, good. First, let's understand why we have to do this. You see, digital disruption is here to stay. In this digital world, I can quote some examples what's happening around us. Fintech companies are going after banking business. Telcos are going after banking business. We see a lot of e-commerce. We spoke about Amazon, Alibaba. They're going after so many retailer business. So what would an existing bank or a retailer do? So the only way you can protect your existing customer is making sure you connect with them at every stage. If I bank with somebody for 20 years and the bank doesn't know my life cycle, what's going on with my life, where am I, what I'm studying, where I have moved, then the bank is losing the business to someone else. So bank needs to kind of digitally follow. Everybody is on digital space these days. So when you start following your existing customer, it becomes easy for you to retain them. There was some question about what Sri Lankan banks are doing. Can we create an interesting premium based on digital behavior? All of this, trust me, is happening in Sri Lanka. From Oracle, we speak to many banks and insurance companies. I've been doing it actively for the last 1 year. There's so much interest. And I'm sure in coming years, we'll see a lot of banks adopting to these new technologies and providing back to the consumers here in Sri Lanka.
Thank you, Sunil. Rasika, just a quick, we are running out of time. We almost have about only a couple of minutes. I want to quickly do a roundup. Rasika, but there was one important point that we actually couldn't touch on, which is called platform multiplicity. Can you just tell about how brands could utilize that? And with that, I want to have one last question with you, and maybe we can close the panel because Lakshman is already there.
Right, so we spoke of consumer behaviors and the importance of understanding consumer behaviors. However, we need to understand platform behaviors as well. So platform multiplicity, what it means is simply there are a lot of platforms these days, from Facebook to Instagram to YouTube to Twitter, Tumblr, hundreds of platforms, of which we see at least a good 20 heavily in use these days. So I would recommend that you first build a foundation, which is to define your objective, to understand your audience, understand the different social channels, the pros and cons of it, and then create content that's relevant to these three areas: the objective, the audience, as well as the social channels. The other thing to realize is that platforms have personalities. Now in Facebook, you're expected to be slightly happy, optimistic, a little bit narcissistic. On Twitter, you're often cool, cynical, and ironic, right? If you take some of Trump's tweets. On Instagram, you're warm, fuzzy, self-loving. On Snapchat, you're a little bit goofy. So you need to first and foremost form a unified message, have a consistent style, and adapt the content to suit the personality of this platform. Research on platform demographics, just as you research your customers. Some of the basic research certainly needs to be carried out. For example, you need to know that on Twitter, the common age group is between 25 and 34. On Facebook and Instagram, for example, it's a bit younger. So those are the basics. Snapchat, as we know, it's mainly teens.
Understood, Rasika. So we'll come back to that because I know that Lakshman is giving me very odd looks. So Vidya, last question. There was a very interesting question about how do you tackle legacy mindsets? Because ultimately in an organization, all of this exists, and sometimes you come across having to deal with these mindsets to really bring the digital and explaining that to the people. And most of the time, I think in organization, the challenge is the mindset, not anything else. Platforms are available, technology is available, talent is you can acquire, all that is, but the mindset of really doing it. How do you make that shift?
I guess mindset is more with regards to the belief.
How do you give someone belief?
Yes. That's a very tough question. I mean, I'll probably take the next 30 minutes answering that. I guess it's simple, right? It's the, so end of the day, we're all in a business. Everyone's looking at you. Are you going to create value to the consumer, the people? Are you going to create value to the business? Show the value creation. Pretty much show the value creation. Every CEO, every CMO, everybody will believe. Irrespective of, there was questions on age, there was questions on mindset. Show the value creation that we can bring. It is the onus of the team who's leading that, irrespective of your age, to take that, what you know, your different thinking, your disruptive thinking, and make a difference in today's world. So that's left to us. And it's like in any business decision. Show the value creation and we can change the mindset. Because no one's going to say no to increased value to the consumer. That consumer is definitely going to say no. The business is definitely not going to say no to an increased value.
Thank you, Vidya. Thank you, panel.